portion for the advanced studies for clarinet. Today I'll be covering Etude number 9, an original composition by Victor Polatschek himself. It focuses on an array of sequenced arpeggios that concludes with a brilliant ending in G minor. Now, getting into the music, this Etude is scored in 2/4 with a tempo suggestion of allegro vivace. Based on this indication, I'd suggest a performance to tempo between quarter note equals 136 to 144. Because this entire study is composed with no places to breathe, I will be going through this with some suggestions on how you can pace this and insert some breath marks. That way it's a little bit more accessible if you cannot start to breathe yet. In my recording that you just heard, I also added these breath marks in my own performance just for context. Now, getting started, I want to begin by saying that I believe that this Etude in particular relies heavily on the performer's ability to navigate all key centers with ease. Given this, I suggest creating a warm-up routine for yourself that focuses on all forms of arpeggiated patterns: major, minor, diminished 7, diminished, and augmented. You can do even more than that. I just think the more fluent you are in these particular patterns, the easier it's going to be to get through this Etude without feeling like you're learning everything from scratch. Once establishing that, take some time to score study, mapping out all of your fingerings and analyze the patterns that are being introduced, linked, and expanded throughout. Once you have a good grounding in this, I think that this Etude starts to become a bit more comfortable in the hands. Focus on your hand position itself and the way in which you are departing and arriving at each beat. Many moments in this study rely on small half-step transitions that link each new grouping, so it's really important to focus on the way we're actually interacting with the clarinet to make sure that we're actually producing efficient movements that allow us to get through this at a fast tempo. I would say, on top of that, focus on keeping your air fast, pressurized, allowing it to connect all the large intervals that are placed throughout this. Lastly, be sure to spend some time working on quality playing. In general, I would say this Etude is an exercise in both endurance and patience. Take some time to focus on the details, shape each entrance with as much clarity and brilliance as the last. I know it's technical, but there is melody in this, and I think we can really start to play this maybe a little more lyrically from the get-go. Try expanding the ways in which you're practicing this with different kinds of groupings, rhythms, dotted rhythms, 3/16ths to an eighth, triplets to an eighth, whatever works for you. Make sure that you have an array of ways that you're going to learn these patterns and get them in your fingers. That way they become really second nature. Starting measure 1, we have a moment on beat 2 where we will have the option to use 2 different fingerings for the written A sharp 5. Using the conventional side key fingering, I find this option totally doable. Additionally, we can use the 1/1 fingering, an excellent option for arpeggiated passages just like this. We can use this for B flat. The only thing that we really need to keep in check is making sure that our bridge key is aligned. If this is unaligned, we can tend to have some response issues that can be really problematic when we're playing something like this. I'm not going to say that your clarinet's going to squeak, but there's a good chance that the note just won't speak. You may have a little bit of a delay in the sound. The note may not be as resonant, it may not respond as well, so just make sure the bridge key is set and the note should come out with good air pressure and good voicing. In measure 9, leaking beats 1 and 2, there is a written F sharp 4, E sharp 4 to another F sharp 4. I would suggest using the first finger to flip between the 2 notes, that way the following A sharp 4 is easier to play and you're able to use the right hand to prep for the C sharp 5 that follows after that. Similarly, we're going to flip between the written F sharp 5 and F5 in measure 13. Since we are approaching from a long D sharp 5 fingering, not allowing us to use the 4 concealer key option. At the end of measure 16, I removed the final 16th note to replace it with a rest. That way I can take a quick breath before the extended passage until measure 32. Measure 17, I'm going to use my 4th B3 fingering to move between the written A sharp 3s. In this case, I can use the alternate option since I'm approaching from a shorter note on the horn. When possible, I always tell my students to use the alternate chromatic fingerings to eliminate any extraneous movement in the fingers. If and when possible, use the chromatic 4 fingerings to get between these half steps. Flipping is totally fine if we absolutely have to, but it is more movement than we typically need. Now moving ahead to measure 23, we have reached the point where the arpeggios are now stacked sequences rather than turnarounds as I'm calling them. For instances like this, I would put a small tenuto on the beginning of each beat that we can really expand the line and prevent any rush in between these trickier intervals that require us to go quickly between the break. Spend some time isolating these sections and working to connect every single beat with the air. Keep the voicing open, relaxed, finger motion light. I think Instances like this really lend themselves to tension and using too much energy in the wrong way. So as you're going through this, just try to feel like you are playing this just as easily as beat 1, if that was easier for you. You know, try and relate it to the easiest section in the etude and try and play everything like that moment. Moving just ahead of measure 32, I removed the final 16th note to replace it with a rest. That way I can take a quick breath for the next extended passage until the 8th rest that occurs in measure 45, where I can take a much bigger breath that will prepare me for that next section. Moving just ahead to measure 50, in this new motive we have a nice ability to return to the main motive in measure 59. Now for these ascending chromatic lines, keep the volume moving, growing, and building until the written D sharp 6 that occurs in measure 55. For this note, it might be easier to use the alternate option, using fingers 2 and 3 in the left hand and 2 and 3 in the right hand with the added A flat, E flat key. In my opinion, I think that might be a little bit easier just because we're going down to a long B fingering. We have to move a lot of fingers anyways, but I find this motion just a little bit easier than conventional D sharp 6 fingering. Similar as before, at the end of measure 58, I removed the final 16th note on beat 4 to replace it with a 16th rest. That way I can take a quick breath before the next extended passage until the 8th rest that occurs until my final added breath mark at the end of measure 66. In measure 67, these ascending arpeggios are a little bit tricky since they are linked by wide 2-octave intervals. Same idea as before, I found it effective to place a small tenuto on the beginning of each beat until the end of measure 70. That way I could really feel like I was staying melodic and expansive with this passage. I want to say that the tendency is going to be to rush through these lines, so be really cognizant and present throughout this entire study, making sure that as you're practicing this, try to pace it in a way that allows you to reach the end of this etude while feeling in control of all your musical ideas. Since this is really dense and technical, it can be super easy to rush, but I think that's really the point of this study. You know, we're really working on every single kind of arpeggio, a lot of small finger movements that can be really easy to trip up over. So try to really feel like you're going for quality over quantity from the get-go, and practice this in a way that really makes it sound effortless and just really exciting by the time you actually get to perform it. For the final written G6 that closes the etude, we have a multitude of options for this note, so make sure that whatever option you do choose, it's in tune, clearly articulated, and full value. Now for my performance, I use thumb and register key, first finger, left hand, fingers 1 and 2 in the right hand, plus the E flat, A flat key. I find that this fingering for me in particular is really reliable at a loud dynamic level, so that's also something to think about. Whatever you do choose, make sure that it works at this fortissimo. I think some fingerings work better at different dynamic levels, especially once you get into the upper altissimo. These fingerings are good for certain situations, so for an instance like this where we really need to land on the note with a full value, loud dynamic level, this is definitely a fingering that I like to choose for this kind of situation. And with that, we've reached the end of etude number 9 in Victor Polatschek's Advanced Studies for the Clarinet. Having reached the end of this masterclass, I hope that you gain a little bit of knowledge that prepares you for a stellar performance down the road. In case you have any additional questions on this etude, please feel free to comment below or send me an email and I'll get back to you very soon. In the meantime, thank you so much for clicking today, and I'll catch you next time for etude number 10. Happy practicing, stay safe, and see you later.